They also say they do it because of foreign policy, and you always ignore that bit, don't you, Douglas?
No, I don't.
When they say they do it because of Iraq, you don't notice that bit.
At least listen to the reason they say they do it.
Agreed. So why didn't he talk about foreign policy in his speech on Saturday?
I'm perfectly willing to talk about foreign policy, as would David Cameron be.
Good.
But you cannot keep on pretending that there is no religious component to the terrorism, because there is.
I thought you said it was cultural.
No, just... Hold on, pick one. Wait a minute.
Cultural and religion is not the same.
Stick with religion. You're saying there is no religious component.
I'm saying there is a religious component. I'm saying it's not a cultural component. The people who blew themselves up on the London Underground were not people who couldn't speak English or didn't go to secular schools.
That's the tragedy of it.
Well,
that's
then don't say it's a cultural problem.
No, but you're
don't pretend that forced marriage.
Because maybe you're doing what
you're doing, which is that you are
don't speak at once, nobody can hear, so let's have a little bit of order, shall we, here? Ming Campbell, briefly, if you would, and then Francis Maude, then I want to go on, because we've got other questions.
Isn't it worth reminding ourselves that for 25 years we had terrorism in part of the United Kingdom, sometimes on the mainland of the United Kingdom. And half of those, some of those, who were the most cruel and the most willing to use violence were people who paraded the Union Jack as part of their culture. I think we should consider very, very carefully before we start endeavouring to find pigeonholes into which this can be made. Last point I want to make is that terrorism is a product of political views, not of poverty.
Francis Maude, briefly, if you would.
Well, I think it's clear that I think everyone would agree there is a religious element in terrorism. We're idle to suppose it isn't. But I think we are a country which is very not just tolerant, but respectful of diversity. And we actually relish it. We don't just tolerate it, which is a kind of slightly chilly virtue. And I think that's great. And the lady over there sort of deprecated the fact that some of the free schools coming up are Church of England schools. Some of them will be associated with other faiths. I think that's a good thing about Britain. It doesn't mean we're promoting separatism. We are actually promoting being a country and an environment and a culture which celebrates that diversity.
Okay. We must go on. If you want to tweet tonight, or if you are tweeting, remember our hashtag BBCQT. Text us if you want to take issue with what's being said, 83981. CFAX page 155 will tell you what others are saying, or if you're watching digitally, push the red button. Let's have a question, please, from Gemma Perlin.
Could the introduction of democracy to Egypt have the effect of destabilising the Middle East and lead to a string of anti-Western extremist Arab states in the region?
This is in the light of tonight's announcement by President Mubarak that he wants a peaceful transition between now and the next election, but he's not standing down now. He's intending to wait until the elections in September, and there's been an angry reaction to this in Cairo with shouts of, "We want democracy now." Well, Mehdi Hasan, what do you make of it?
I welcome what they're doing in Egypt, and I'm delighted to see, after Tunisia, in Egypt, people taking to the streets and calling for democracy. For far too long, especially here in the West, we've looked at the Arab world and rather patronisingly said, oh, they can't deal with democracy, or they're too backward or barbaric, or there's religious reasons that mean that they can't do democracy. And actually they're showing that they can do democracy if we get out of the way.
The President hasn't stood down.
Well, of course, the President is our man, let's not forget. The President is not their man, the President is our man. For 30 years, President Mubarak's been propped up by the US and its allies, $1.3 billion of American aid every year. So if we're going to talk about why he's still there, he's there because he is one of a number of regional strongmen and dictators and tyrants and despots who is there to basically protect our regional petrol station from which we get our cheap oil. And unfortunately, that has meant that people in the Arab world have not had the democracy and the democratic rights that they so deserve. So I welcome these peaceful revolutions which are getting rid of these dictators. And if I was a prince in Saudi Arabia tonight, I hope I wouldn't be getting any sleep.
Ming Campbell.
Well, I think it's dangerous to try and suggest that all of the countries of the Middle East are the same as each other. Saudi Arabia is really quite different in many respects, not least, of course, that when oil goes over $100 a barrel, then there's a great deal of money in Saudi Arabia. And one of the ways in which stability has been maintained has been by enormous public expenditure on health and education and on providing jobs. And so far in Saudi Arabia there's been no real argument or concern about political rights. Indeed, the most political person out of Saudi Arabia recently is Osama bin Laden.
Can we come back to Egypt?
Of course. But the point is, nonetheless, you should not imagine, because the question rather implied that Egypt was going to be the trigger for a whole variety of other countries going the same way. I think this is now a very difficult and very dangerous juncture in this progress, because there's no doubt what the people in Freedom Square want. They want Mubarak to go, and they want him to go quickly, and they want to have elections. And by saying tonight what essentially he said the last time he made a television broadcast, then I think he may well have provoked a rather less peaceful response than we've had so far. And it's not one other, or 2 points. First, there are already strikes breaking out in Egypt, on the Suez Canal and other places. It looks as if industrial unrest may follow. And of course, the other point is that all of this will depend on what the army does. So far, the army has held the ring. But if the army takes the view that there's so much likelihood of instability that it feels necessary to intervene, then having intervened, it may well set its face against democracy. Don't forget, that this is how President Nasser came to power. Instability, the army took over in a burst of nationalism. We could well see a repeat of that in Egypt.
The woman in the fifth row there, sixth row, you. Yes.
I think the best way that we can support a transition to democracy in Egypt is by not intervening too much, because it's our intervening and worrying about Islamic extremism and by labelling things as this is an Islamic value, this is a Western value. I think that is what creates extremism.
Francis Maude, do you think this is a dangerous moment because the President hasn't stood down?
Well, the whole position is hazardous. It's very important there should be a transition. I rather agree with what the lady's just said, actually, that it's important that we don't send a signal that there's a particular person or regime that we in the West want. I think that would be massively destabilising. Ideally, what we want is a government emerging which is broad-based and inclusive and commands broad support. How that emerges, whether you move immediately to elections, is a matter for Egypt, not for us. At this stage, when we're recording, none of us have actually seen the detail of what President Mubarak has said. But what I think we've been saying in the British government for some time is that there needs to be a transition that meets the aspirations of the Egyptian people and leads to the creation of a government which does command that broad base of support, because that's really important for the stability of the region.
Yes, sir.
Even if that is a Muslim Brotherhood president, you will support him?
Well, I prefer it to be a broad-based, I would like there to be a broad-based, inclusive government. I think when a country is emerging from a period like this, you want to have as broad a base of support for the government as there can be. You don't want there to be a divisive government.
Are you saying that you're in favour of Muslim Brotherhood or against the Muslim Brotherhood?
No, are you going to support if Muslim Brotherhood president been elected for people by the people
Well,
of
I'm not
Egypt?
going to support any Egyptian government, because I think
But
it's
you
for the
supported
Egyptian...
already Hosni Mubarak, so we know that.
We will support what emerges as the choice of the Egyptian people.
Douglas Murray.
The first thing is that to get back to the question, the issue of democracy across the region. Some of us have been arguing for many years that Arab states, Muslim majority countries, have the same desire for democracy as the rest of the world. You used to hear people say about the Eastern Bloc, the Eastern Europeans can't cope with democracy. Lo and behold, they could. You used to hear it said about South America, the same thing. South Americans somehow can't cope with democracy. Lo and behold, they could. And the same thing is becoming clear across the Arab and Muslim world. The Lebanese Druze leader, Walid Jumblat, said that the sight in 2005 of Iraqis going to the polls for the first time would have in time a seismic effect in the region, because people would not see their neighbours going to vote and not want that themselves. Now, this is coming sometime after most of us expected it, but there are obviously problems, and it's naive to walk into this and ignore some of the problems within Egypt.
Do you see Mubarak, as Mehdi Hasan said, as our person, the West's person in Egypt?
No,
or do you think we should have...
I think it's equally patronising to the people of Egypt to assume they have had no role in their own country. However, the West has had a very complex and, I think, unfortunate, regrettable situation in recent years of thinking that stability and the pursuit of stability in the region was the most important thing. That has come back to bite us again and again, not least in the rise in anti-Western feeling across the region. There is a problem, though, and it has to be flagged up to go back to the question, which is the Brotherhood. The Brotherhood, if it didn't have Muslim in the name, would be being described at the moment as a fascist political party. It has its